So again, here we are to continue talking about JavaScript, asynchronous JavaScript. We're working on our weather map library, and so far we've refactored the getWeather function into its own file. We've rewritten the code here so that it uses a promise, and that solves challenges 1, 2, and 3. We've also extracted the API key and added an optional parameter for units. Now we're on to challenge number 4. And in the previous challenge, we looked at using a promise. So, here we have fetch, it returns a promise, a response promise. And then we called .then on the response promise, and we got the response, and we called response promise.json to get a JSON promise, and this promise will return the JSON to us. And so we're going to just return that JSON promise from this function, right? So now anything outside this function can use the promise returned and resolve it, right? And then we handled that promise over here by saying, get weather with the 2 parameters, and then .then on the promise that was returned. And again, you could shorten these 3 lines into a single line if you want, which makes this code awfully simple, right? It's like very short. I shouldn't say simple as in, because understanding how the promises work and how they're chained here is fairly complicated, but the code itself, really, it's just 4 lines, right? And we could have actually reduced this to 2 lines if we just use this one in place of the 3 here. Okay, so challenge number 4, let's talk about that, right? So this challenge says use async and await keywords, right, to streamline your promise code. Okay, and if you looked at the examples earlier in the videos, like the very beginning videos before we started working on the weather API itself, there was a couple examples using a promise, right? So we're going to revisit those and apply them here. So anytime you have a promise, you can await it, right? The await keyword works only inside a function that's marked async. And an async function always returns a promise, okay? So to apply these here, what we do is we mark the getWeather method as asynchronous. So we can say async in front of, function. Right now, by making this change here, this promise will, or this function will always return a promise. And since we're treating getWeather as if it returns a promise here, right, because we said that then on the promise that was returned, then we don't have to make any changes over here. Okay, same thing. Okay, it works the same way. Here, though, we can make some changes that streamline and make the code here easier to read. Okay, so once we've marked a function as async, we can use the await keyword. And the await keyword is going to work like this. Anytime you have an object or something that returns a promise, you can await for that promise to resolve. So fetch returns a promise, and I'm going to wait for it to resolve right here. And what it's going to resolve to is what the promise would resolve to in .then. So it's the response. So I'm going to shorten this to the response because this isn't the promise object that was returned. Instead, the computer, it does each line of code, and normally it just runs past all the lines. It does them all in order. But when you have a wait on a line, if there's something asynchronous, a promise, right, it waits on that line of code before executing the next line. So if I put a wait on this line, we have to wait for the promise returned from fetch to resolve, and then we move on to line 6. Okay? So this promise is going to resolve into a response object. And then on this line, I can get rid of this stuff here, like where I call .then, I can just get rid of all that and the callback, and we can take the response object and say, hey, let's wait till this response well, I'm going to call .json on the response object, and it returns a promise, right? So this returns another promise, and we call .then on that promise. But instead, what we'll do is we'll say let's await for that promise to resolve, right? And when this resolves, what it's going to do is it's going to return a JSON object, not wrapped in a promise, just straight up JSON, and you're done, right? So, so we're going to wait for this JSON object to resolve, and then we can just return the JSON, okay? So this is challenge number 4 here, okay? And I kind of gave some sample code here, so you can kind of read through this. There's the sample, and then here's the example there. Let's give it a try and see if it works. 90210. Oh, 60 degrees, clear sky, nice, okay. So thanks for watching. Actually, wait, before you stop, let's do one more thing here. So the first challenge here uses, or the first half of this challenge, I just remember there's one other thing we want to talk about. The first half of this is using async and await, right? But what happens if there's an error, okay? So what happens if we have an error in our code, right? This doesn't have a catch block on it, right? So we don't have any way to catch an error in here. I guess we could catch an error here with catch, but maybe we want to handle the error here with fetch, right? So to do that with async and await, what you're going to use is a try catch block. And a try catch block looks like this. This is just standard JavaScript, okay? It's built into JavaScript. It's not like part of promise or anything special, right? And what you're saying here is it's a lot like an if statement, so, or an if else. What you're saying is, hey, I'd like to try something, right? And if it fails, handle failure here, right? Or really, I should say handle errors here, okay? So try something here, and if there's an error, handle it down here, okay? And let's put that into context here, right? So I'm going to take these 2 lines of code, which could potentially produce an error, right? So, I could call the server and something could fail, and if it does, it's going to throw an error. If it throws an error, JavaScript will catch that error down here. I'm going to put error there, right? And then we could do something with the error, right? I'm going to say return error, okay? And then I'll take this return JSON right here and I'll just put it inside there. So now we're going to do one of 2 things. It's like an if else. We're going to try to do these 2 lines of code, and if either one of these throws an error, we're going to return the error message. And if these are successful, we'll return the JSON block, okay? So there we go. So now we're handling errors. Let's check this out. Let's do 017, 34 degrees. It sounds pretty cold. Anyway, so that's kind of working. So thanks for watching, and I hope this was useful, and good luck with your projects. And we'll continue in the next video. We have a couple more challenges to cover down here, okay?